It's the black guy in the corner, but they'd rather see a nigga on the corner. They say I'm stealing Nick's clips like I'm stealing Nick's chick, not knowing that I hit him first week for the lick. I said, Nick, I could post here while you post there. Let's run the ads up, then let's meet up over there.
All right.
Let's talk about the Jews now.
Real quick. Yeah. So this is what we're going to do, guys. I'm going to moderate this thing. I'm not going to be participating. I'm just going to moderate. This is mainly between Nick and Destiny. We're going to talk about the JQ, the thing that everyone else is scared of. I think Sneeko did a great preamble there talking about everyone is scared to talk about this, but we will talk about it. So I'm going to turn it to Destiny first. What's your stance on the situation, Destiny? And then we can just have Nick go off of that.
Sure. My issue is certain groups of people will act in certain ways, and people will take those behaviors and they'll try to use that in some really weird way to explain every single thing that's going on in the world. Sometimes people, so for instance, they'll say, oh, well, these people are disproportionately represented in some area, which for Jewish people, which for all people are true, right? You call a guy for help on your PC, probably going to talk to an Indian more likely than, a Chinese person. Or if you go to a person in the Midwest and ask somebody to roof your house, you're probably going to get a Hispanic person rather than a white person, right? There are definitely people that that tend to move towards certain areas, which happens for a variety of reasons. Where IQ might be one of those reasons for a variety of reasons. But the problem is people will take these trends that they see, and then from there they extrapolate these crazy ideas that somehow every single world government, financial institution, educational institution, private firm are all working for some shadowy group of people, when in reality, every single behavior you see can be explained really simply.
It's not shadowy.
Hold on. Let Destiny finish his point completely before anyone says anything.
Every single behavior that you see can be explained by ordinary human behavior. You don't need any sort of shadowy people or behind-the-scenes plan to explain any of the stuff that's going on.
Kanye, Mel Gibson, they're just crazy.
All right, I want to respond.
Nick. Yeah, please.
Okay. So I'm glad that you said that. That's the thesis. It's certain people act a certain way sometimes. To suggest that there's any sort of tribal loyalty or anything like that is really, really weird, really crazy. I always love the weasel words. It's always like, because I'll give you my thesis in a second, but I just want to respond to that. It's always like these weasel words, like really weird, really crazy. I'll tell you what's not crazy. Jews have been a diaspora people for 2,000 years. In the last 150 years, they have made an effort to resettle Palestine, which they consider their holy land. They consider their historic homeland. They have, by hook and by crook, in violent ways and through corruption, internationally conspired, in the sense that it's people that have made an agreement to make that happen, to resettle Jews in Palestine. And they did it in some legitimate ways, some illegitimate ways, in Europe, in the Middle East, in America. And in many cases, it was violent. It involved subterfuge. It involved corruption. The idea that like that pattern of behavior is happening, it's not really weird. It's not really crazy. You're right. People act in certain ways. People act according to their nationality, tribe, ideas they have. And so my thesis is that Jews in particular have a tribal as well as a religious reason to act the way they do. They're disproportionately represented in many sectors of America. And by the way, they're not jobs. Saying that
banking is a job? Give me a break, right?
Exactly. Well, banking is, but owning all the banks.
Owning a bank is the job.
Owning all the banks is not a job. You may get an Asian programmer, an Asian IT guy, because Asians are good at math disproportionately. That's true. You might get a Mexican landscaper because it's cheap, low-skill labor that Mexicans are performing. Jews owning all the banks is something that they have inherited over centuries and millennia because of politics and because of religion. And so if we want to talk about how that got to be, I don't think there's anything crazy about that. I think it's actually an interesting and important question, because these are the decision makers in the society. It's not just people that are the legislators. We have to talk about the big money people. We got to talk about the media. We got to talk about the people in the bureaucracy. Determining their motivations and who they are is an important attribute of understanding why things are the way they are in America. The Jewish identity explains so much of it. That's the thesis.
Okay. What's your response to that?
What topic do you want to start with?
I mean, that he's saying that it isn't a coincidence that they're involved in.
Sure, it's not a coincidence. Nothing in history is a coincidence. But the question isn't whether it's a coincidence. The question is, remember, the JQ does not just state that Jews happen to be overrepresented in some industries. Now, people like Nick will try to shift that argument. Well, aren't there a lot of Jews there? But that's not the JQ. The JQ says that there is an intentional effort by those people to congregate all of their power and then to use that power to control the levers of society in very particular ways in order to effect positive outcomes for them, oftentimes at the expense of others. That's the JQ.
Okay, let me pose the next question then for you guys. Do you not think that Zionism pushes that?
Zionism does, and we can try to say that like it's just because we're oh God, sorry, I'm not gonna get triggered.
There it is.
No, you're fine. You're fine, bro.
We could try to say that like it's because of some weird Jewish blah blah blah. But the reality is, the United States wants an ally in the Middle East. Israel is our best ally that we have in the Middle East. Just like Turkey is a strong ally in the Middle East.
We give them money. That's why.
The idea that we need like a Jewish conspiracy or some Jewish plan to explain that, we don't need one. Just like we don't need a Turkish conspiracy.
Wait.
Just like we don't need a Turkish conspiracy to explain why we're so close to Turkey in the Middle East, despite all the political disagreements that we have with them.
I want to really laser focus in on this. So, Stephen,
did you finish your point before he starts?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so Stephen, I want to hear what your opinion is on Israel. So if I understand you correctly, you're saying that Israel is America's closest ally because Israel benefits America the most. Is that right?
I'm saying that Israel is a close ally to the United States because there's a benefit for them being an ally in the Middle East. Yes.
What is the benefit?
The benefit is geopolitical. The benefit is that we've got a strong ally in that region of the world.
Okay.
It helps us deploy military
restating
assets.
yourself.
It helps us have bases in these areas. Yeah, sure.
How many bases do we have in Israel?
I don't know how many bases we have.
Okay, really? What do we deploy from Israel?
I don't even know in terms of economy. Nothing. There's absolutely no economic, no beneficial interest whatsoever for Israel being there.
And
the United
no
States.
Israelis died in the Iraq War. Everything in the big controversy actually for the Muslim world is that Saudi Arabia allowed us to station there and use their airspace, which is like a total.
We're friends with Saudi Arabia too, are we not?
I know. But
is that
we're
also
not
a Jewish
arguing about
conspiracy?
Saudi Arabia.
Wait, why are we friends with Saudi Arabia if the Saudi Arabians and the Jewish people don't get along?
Subject.
That's the point.
If they don't always get along, why are we friends with Saudi Arabia then too?
Hang on. We could talk about Saudi Arabia in a second. I want to talk about Israel. So you said that we're allied with Israel because they provide us a benefit. I said, what's a benefit? You said, well, it's a geostrategic. I said, what does that mean? You said, well, we deploy stuff and blah, blah, blah. And I just said, well, no, actually, they don't do any of that. So I want to stick to the same question. What does Israel do for us specifically?
Specifically, I wouldn't be able to tell what Iraq does for us specifically either. No, I don't know.
So
100%.
No
I don't know.
Okay, well, the answer is nothing. And the answer is nothing. We give them $3.8 billion per year in aid. That's in addition to all kinds of other special provisions. Every other country, because you're right to some extent about the foreign aid. We give a lot of these countries foreign aid, but there's a reciprocal advantage for foreign aid. Like, for example, we give Egypt a lot of foreign aid. You want to know why we give Egypt a lot of foreign aid? They became the second they became the second largest recipient of foreign aid after the Camp David Accords in 1978. They were the first nation to sign a peace treaty with Israel. It was only after that they became the #2 recipient of foreign aid. But one of the benefits that we get from the foreign aid, besides that we brokered a peace deal with Egypt, it was very controversial, very unpopular, is that Egypt buys our military equipment with the money we give them. Israel's the only country in the world that they don't have to spend all the foreign aid money they get on the American defense industry. They can spend it on their own defense industry. Only country that gets that sweetheart deal. In addition, we have a special part of the aid that we give Israel that we give it all in a lump sum at the beginning of the year, as opposed to giving it over the course of the year. We give it to them as a lump sum. And what they do with the money is they actually buy our American Treasury notes so they can make interest. Isn't that beautiful? So we give them the money and they demand this, only one, in a lump sum, and they take the $3.8 billion and they spend a little on their own defense industry. They spend a little on ours, and then they buy our Treasury notes and they make a little interest off the money we give them. The other thing is this. We give it to them as a loan, which is important. If we gave it to them as a grant, we would have to monitor how they spend it. Well, they don't need that kind of scrutiny on what they spend it on, so they accept it as a loan, but we forgive the loan. So there's no scrutiny, but we also don't collect it back. There's also no interest. These are all the kinds of special sweetheart provisions we give them, in addition to them being the #1 recipient. And there's actually no tangible benefit that we derive from them. In fact, it's the opposite. Constantly, we are catching spies, like the Jonathan Pollard affair. In the Trump administration, they got busted for putting listening devices in Washington, D.C.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Do we have any military bases in Israel?
You tell me you just looked it up on your phone.
I did. So we do have military bases in Israel. Okay. I see that we have radar installations in Israel.
Tell me about
Not only that, I see we have radar installations in Israel that literally help us keep track of what's going on over the skies of Iran. Do you think that provides us a geostrategic advantage?
No, because Iran is not our adversary. Why is Iran our adversary?
Because we had a geostrategic interest in Iraq, and Iraq was for a while an adversary in Iran. And Iran is also an adversary because Iran has international, the IRGC literally does ops all over the United States.
Really? Wait. The IRGC does ops in the United States?
No, hold on. Against U.S. troops.
Where?
What do you think? In Iraq. Why are we in Iraq? Why are we in Iraq? Why do you think Donald Trump killed Soleimani?
Why are we in Iraq?
Why do you think Donald Trump killed Soleimani?
All right, I got a little feedback. Not going to be interrupting too much. Just want to give some feedback based on what we've seen thus far. I think one of the biggest problems when we talk about Israel and Jewish people, something that always comes up, is that people like Destiny will try to act as if there's one-offs, right? Well, just because these people that did this for Israel's benefit and are working in the American government and they're Zionists doesn't mean that we can blanket this to all of Jewish people. We hear this a lot. Think about this, and this may not directly discuss what they're talking about, but think about this. Is there another country that you hear being discussed like by their prime minister, where I think we put up a video the other day when he was on Patrick Bet-David's show, and he says this all the time, where he was saying that I'm the prime minister of the only Jewish nation in the world. Every time you hear Israel, you hear the word Jewish or Jew, right? And that's not from outsiders. That's from Netanyahu. That's from Israel. That's their claim. That's what they stand on. This is the only Jewish nation in the world. And when you talk about other countries, when I think about Canada, when I think about America, when I think about Mexico, when I think about France, when I think about India, when I think about various countries, right? It never, there's never a lead-in with this is the first Christian country or the first Catholic country or the first Muslim. We never hear these things. And perhaps that's one of the reasons why it's hard to not associate Jewish people with Israel, right? It's almost as if Bibi Netanyahu and Israel like when that association benefits them, but then when you're doing things in the Jewish name or in the Jewish religion or in Israel's name, you get upset and act as if people are anti-Semitic when they're just criticizing what Israel's done. Perhaps it's because you keep doing all these things in the name of Judaism, where now people are looking at you and saying like, no, that's evil. What the Jewish people are doing is evil. Because they're associating it with Israel, because every time Netanyahu jumps on TV and talks about Israel, he makes it very clear that Israel is the only Jewish state. Maybe it's because it's the only one compared to a lot of other countries where there may be various Christian countries. So therefore, they don't have to lead with that. But when you lead in everything that you do with that, then it draws the attention when it's a negative thing of people associating all of the people that identify with that. So neither here nor there. That's just something that was in the back of my head. What I also want to talk about is when people fail to acknowledge the connections that are there, the influence that is there. Like Destiny fails to acknowledge these things. And you hear a lot of people who defend Israel, who defend Judaism, like the Ted Cruz types, when they don't draw the connections of how Israel and Jewish people in the American government or just associated with the American government had used their influence to benefit Israel. And people act as if, no, that's just a person that happened to be Jewish. It's actually just in America's best interest. It's not in that person's personal interest. They're not pushing it because of that. They're pushing it because of America, when it's almost like an insult to our intelligence. It's insulting our intelligence. And when you continuously deny those connections, what ends up happening is people dig deeper. People look for more. People get pissed off because you won't even acknowledge these simple connections. So then you get maybe I'm not speaking for Nick Fuentes, but maybe this is why we've seen Nick and other people resort to using certain rhetoric that when they're debating on this topic or they're saying certain things. It's because y'all act like we're stupid, as if we can't draw these clear connections. When we called out, what was the lady, she was part of the squad, Ilhan Omar. Wasn't she getting attacked even with Zohran Mamdani in New York? I think there were a couple videos that came out that they were acting as if their affiliation is to their homeland rather than to America. Cool. So why can't we call those things out? This is what I hear when Nick says, keep the same energy when you're criticizing one to criticize the other. That's the only way to keep everybody accountable for their actions. So we act as if we can't clearly see the influence that certain people in our government who are Zionists, who have a very strong connection with Israel, change their opinions, change their stances based on what benefits Israel first rather than what's good for America. And I'll prove it to you right now. And Destiny actually proved it. When Nick pressed Destiny and said, well, what are the benefits? What are the benefits of us having Israel as an ally? The first thing that Destiny mentioned, I don't know if y'all noticed, was that it's an advantage in deploying military assets. Think about that. Now, I remember a couple weeks ago when we were looking up George Washington, and George Washington's advice on foreign affairs was simple: don't get involved. Stay focused on America. Stop getting involved in everybody else's stuff. So here, the number one thing that Destiny says is the advantage. It's a geopolitical advantage in allowing us to deploy our military assets. If we did not have the relationship with Israel in the first place, to where we back them with any and everything that's advantageous to them in that region that has little to do with us, then we wouldn't need to deploy military assets. That's the point. And that's what Nick was referring to when he said it's a circular argument. There are only benefits because we have a relationship with Israel. There are only benefits because Benjamin Netanyahu was coming to America trying to convince the American people, just like he's doing now, trying to convince us. But when he was coming to America trying to convince us that Iraq and Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction and that America needed to go over there and deal with it. And I didn't even know, I think Nick brings this up a little bit later in the interview, so I don't want to spoil it, but I did not know that no Israeli soldiers died in that war. That's kind of crazy. Netanyahu comes here, tells us that, oh no, we need to go and address Saddam Hussein and Iraq because they have weapons of mass destruction. 500,000 children dead later. And then we sit back and wonder, as if it's to anyone's surprise, why people in that region look at us as the big Satan, as Bibi Netanyahu likes to say. If the primary benefit of us having a relationship with Israel is to deploy military assets that we otherwise wouldn't need to deploy because we wouldn't need military action in that region, other than the fact that we are aligning ourselves with Israel. Do y'all get what I'm saying? I think, okay. And I almost forgot. When Nick said that there's $3.8 billion that we give to Israel, you know what's a huge problem for me? Is that that's we the people's money, right? That's our tax dollars, right? That's what we contribute. That's America. We are the American people, right? We are America. Not the people that just have jobs of printing money, not the people that just happen to be politicians and make a lot of the decisions, but we are America. So when we don't truly understand what this money is going towards, why it's going towards them, don't agree with it going towards them, it's putting us in a position where now when he says that we got to deploy military assets and that's the advantage in having Israel there, we get somewhere to deploy military. All of that is money that is coming out of America. But wait, people will say it's still going back to American businesses, because out of that money, then Israel's spending a lot of the money with, oh my God. I just realized I didn't talk about the most important thing that Nick was describing. This is one of the most important things that Nick was discussing, and it's with the foreign military financing, right? The FMF. So I did not know, had no idea that Israel is the only country, and I had to look a lot of this stuff up. I had to look a whole lot of this stuff up. Israel is the only country that we give lump sum grants to. Now, Nick said that it was a loan, and based on my research, since 1985, it actually hasn't been loans, that it switched to just grants. But before that, it did used to be loans that were forgiven. And I believe Nick mentioned that they were still loans. So therefore, you're not able to look into what they're doing with it compared to a grant where you can look into it. So the loan allows them to spend it however they want. I believe they changed that after 1985 based on the research that I've done. However, Israel is unique in that they get a lump sum when it comes to their aid compared to other countries that we give aid to, where it's just throughout the year, where it's almost like we're giving them the money, but it's actually just really being written to our gun manufacturers, our weapons manufacturers. So it never really goes to the country that we're giving aid to. It really just acts like it's going there, but it's really just sent directly to our weapons manufacturers. Israel's different. Now, I couldn't find anything as far as what Nick said with the treasury bonds. I believe that's what he mentioned, where Israel buys the treasury bonds and then the treasury bonds accumulate interest. However, I did find how the grant works. Now, hold on. Let me look this up. It says that the U.S. deposits Israel's foreign military financing into a special interest-bearing account at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. So a special interest-bearing account at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. Israel doesn't just move the money freely. It stays in the Fed account until drawn down to pay for defense purchases. So that sounds right? Nothing to see here. But then it says that they earn interest. And that's the whole advantage of getting it in a lump sum and placing it in an interest accruing account. It's gaining interest every day that it's in there. And now you can imagine with 3.8 billion, that's a lot of interest. So the other unique thing about the aid that we give to Israel is that, unlike other countries where they have to spend it with America, Israel's allowed to spend some of it, I believe a smaller amount, but they're allowed to spend that with Israel weapons manufacturers. So it's us giving them money to spend on their companies with their weapon manufacturers. Now let's go back 30 seconds to what I said as far as with the interest. Now, any interest that is accumulated in that account, they do not have to spend that. Based on my research, they're not obligated to spend that on defense, on military. They have more freedom to use that money to spend it however. So this is why when we sit back and look at our relationship with Israel, and you'll see a lot of people like Destiny and other people act as if it's the same relationship and it's no different than other countries that we help out with aid, and Destiny will name all these other countries. It's different when it comes to Israel. It's always been different when it comes to Israel. And when we have a country that was founded on certain principles established by our first presidents, like a George Washington, and he makes it very clear in recommending in his farewell speech that we should not get involved in foreign affairs, I think it's perfectly appropriate. And I think we need to be asking these questions as to what is the benefit of this special relationship. Let's actually weigh it out. What are the pros? What are the cons? And most importantly, do we, the people, want that relationship? I remember Donald Trump saying something like, oh, well, he's really just a representation of the people, right? That's what every president should do or should be. You should be a representative of the people, not doing what's in your best interest, but doing what's in the American people's best interest. Isn't that how you make America great again? Doesn't the scripture say it's hard to, or you can't serve two masters? Not that it's hard. So perhaps Ted Cruz and all the evangelical Christians or whoever else is religious should reevaluate our allegiance to America when considering our allegiance to Israel as well. Is it even possible? That's a fair question that I think we all need to consider. And for a lot of this stuff, the fact that it's so complicated, that's another thing. The average American person should be able to understand this stuff without doing all this research. And it's almost like they try to confuse us on purpose or throw different things our way so the majority of us won't feel comfortable even speaking on these topics. Because it took me a while to research this, to figure this stuff out. Even if you go on ChatGPT, you got to confirm it with other sources and whatnot. If it is not explained in a simple way, then we should question it. If it's not explained in a simple way, then we should question it. So I think it's fair for us to question that.